Our last team work was more focused on coastal processes and chose to run scenarios for sediment transport along a coast using CEM. So I'll let you introduce your projects.
Does this one work? Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here, and I appreciate your attention. I know it's almost lunchtime, so thanks for staying locked in. Our group was inspired by a lot of recent observational work of large sediment pulses transiting through river systems and nourishing shorelines and affecting shoreline morphology. And so we wanted to explore this process through some modeling, and the goal of this exercise was sort of twofold. The first goal was to create a Jupyter notebook that students could use to explore how we can understand some of these events better in places where we don't have necessarily really great measurements, really great gauge info or beach surveys. And the second goal, and frankly, probably the more prominent goal here that we spent most time on, is just learning how some of these models work and how we can implement them. And so what we did is we basically, I'll give you a brief overview. We chose a field site. We sort of parameterized the drainage basin for that site and used HydroTrend, which is an empirical model based on basin parameters to estimate sediment discharge. And then we used CEM to essentially model scenarios that vary discharge and try to understand how sediment transits along the coast. So I will go ahead and pass it to MB to describe our field site and some of the HydroTrend stuff.
Hi, everyone. I'm MB. So we applied this coupled model to a specific watershed and coastline along southern Oregon. And so this is the Coquille River, which is drains the third largest drainage basin in the West Range along Oregon. And so you can kind of see from this image, there are some human modifications to the system. So we were interested in kind of leveraging HydroTrend's parameter of anthropogenic disturbance. And then also you can see kind of where this river mouth outputs is a pretty sandy coastline that we use for CEM and kind of tracks several hundred kilometers downdrift. And so one of the cool things about this coupled lab that we've built is that while we are focusing on the Coquille River, it kind of the same principles apply to any watershed. So you could, choose to study a different watershed or river system and a different coastline. And so now I'll pass it to Roya, who will introduce HydroTrend.
Hi guys, I'm Roya, and I want to talk about the data that we use for running the HydroTrend. So you can see that we downloaded the topography of the area, which is a very big watershed. And basically, HydroTrend uses two input files, and they are text files. One of them is a hypsometry of the area, which is this watershed. We calculate those based on these elevations. As you can see, we have 25 bins, and we calculated the area for each elevation bin, and it's accumulative. The area is accumulated area, and it's shown here also. We put a lot of time to characterize the area. We basically had to input all the climate data, all the temperature, precipitation, all those data in the input file. And we provided that for students so they can use it.
Okay. And so HydroTrend outputs several variables that we have that students can kind of look at. And so the two main variables that we were kind of studying as part of this lab is river discharge through time. So again, we're looking at the period from 2000 to 2020. And like Roya said, this is kind of based on variable precipitation and temperature data over those 20 years. And then for the purposes of this coupled model, we also needed to kind of emphasize here bed load discharge through time. And so what's cool, because we have, this real system that we're kind of comparing these model outputs to, is that students can then look at the kind of compare the modeled output to observational data and test and see, okay, how well did the model kind of represent this system? And so what we found was that our model outputs were slightly lower than observations over this time period. And so then, one exercise that students could do then is to go back into the input files and modify some of the parameters. So maybe, for example, maybe we underestimated the volume of groundwater storage. And so maybe that would increase flow if we actually, maybe we underestimated. So basically the students can kind of parameterize and tweak the model and then see how closely their modeled outputs fit what we observe through this time. And then based on the bed load discharge, then we feed that into CEM. And I think Ryan will talk about that.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Ryan. We had a few other things that we had to collect for initial parameters for our second model, CEM. So because we're using a real place, we wanted to use COSAT. So we actually pulled a COSAT extracted shoreline using Landsat imagery for this section, about 50 kilometers of the Oregon coast. You can see here where our river comes out. And then the other thing that we worked on was developing functions to pull actual wave data. There's two different buoys nearby. So this allows in the lab to provide a station. You could vary it so that different students could do different stations. And this automatically calculates the parameters that would be needed to initialize CEM. And then we provide all of that information and initialize a domain. And I will pass to Emily to talk about how we use that.
Hi, I'm Emily. So once we were able to initialize the domain of the model, we ran the model to see how the shoreline evolved over the specified wave regime. And then once we were able to do that, lots of implementation. So once we were able to do that, we were able to incorporate hydrotrends output. So we use the sediment discharge output, specified it at the specific location where the Coquille River is, right there where the red dot is. So we made this a factor of the increment used in hydrotrend, so each day. And then we were able to create a little GIF. I'm not sure why it's two of them, but so essentially, this is just showing us over 200 years what it would look like. So once we were able to take our sediment runoff or discharge from our fire and flood event in hydrotrend, we are able to take those values and implement them into CEM, creating the shoreline evolution. And I'm gonna pass it off to Connor for conclusions.
Cool. So yeah, I'll go ahead and say that the goal of this notebook is really to familiarize students with the model and familiarize us with the model. And although the problem is somewhat ill-posed based on sort of the timescales that these things operate on and the fact that this isn't an entirely sandy shoreline, I think that there's a lot that students can learn from implementing these models and then sort of tweaking parameters in the upstream basin and then as well as the CEM parameters and seeing how that affects sort of some of the outputs. And then I'll just close by, like every other group, thank you guys so much. This has been a great week. We've learned a lot about everything from version control to the land lab sort of ecosystem to PyMT. So it's definitely been a whirlwind, but we've learned a lot and really grateful for the opportunity. And I want to give a special shout out to the postdocs who volunteered their time this week. You guys are awesome. So thank you so much.